vampire story. It wasn't very successful and it didn't get very far with it. But Mary Godwin, the 18-year-old girlfriend of Shelley, she was more lucky. She had a terrible nightmare when she was there. She dreamt that there was this lifeless body of a man, and suddenly in the middle of the night, this body came alive and stood up. She was absolutely terrified by this, and she worked it up into a story about a young student doctor who was experimenting with trying to bring dead things back to life. Now, at the time, people were very interested in a thing called galvanism. Electricity was a fairly recent discovery then. People were trying all sorts of different things with it. And one of the things was galvanism, where you would cut the leg off a dead dog and stick some electric wires in it, pass a current through, and the leg would start to twitch. And then people started to think, well, could you bring people back to life? So she started writing a story about a young student doctor who created this man. He had to make the man quite big to fit all the body parts in, and then brought this creature to life. And the creature didn't quite like it was alive, and because people were scared of him and shunned him and were nasty to him, the creature became more and more evil, and eventually turned on his creator, killed half of his family and friends, and then the two of them ended up in this life and death struggle. Now, the name of that young student, doctor, was Victor Frankenstein. And everybody at this party said, this is a great story, maybe we should write it because of a proper book, which she did. And it was published 2 years later, by which time she married Shelley, she'd become Mary Shelley, and she wrote the book, Frankenstein. The granddaddy of all horror books, of all horror stories, was created that night in The Year Without a Son by Mary Shelley. But also, Dr. Polidori said to Byron, he said, look, I quite like your vampire stories. Would you mind if I use them to write my own vampire story? Byron said, no, that's fine. And Polidori wrote a book called The Vampire, which was the first of the vampire books ever published. Both of his books, The Vampire, Frankenstein, came out of that one summer. And the character of Dracula, Polidori based on Lord Byron. He was dark, good-looking, he was an aristocrat, he was very wealthy, he had lots of women fell in love with him, but he was very dangerous. In fact, Byron had been named by somebody at the time. They had called him mad, bad, and dangerous to know, which is quite a good description of a vampire as well. So in a way, Byron was the original goth. Because the idea of this vampire being this sort of mysterious, gloomy, outsider figure is something which is carried on through all vampire stories. And the vampire hero of the Twilight books, whose name escapes me, he has got quite a lot of Byron in him. It wasn't the most famous vampire story, but about 50 years later, an Irish writer called Bram Stoker used the vampire, Polidori's book, as the basis of his own novel, which he called Dracula. Again, based on Polidori's story and a lot of these European myths and legends of vampires. And these two books, Dracula and Frankenstein, were hugely popular at the time. Lots of plays were made of these, and they were sort of, well, like a horror film is these days, they're very popular with people and quite shocking. And then, in fact, one of the very first featured films made in 1910 was a version of Frankenstein, which is 100 years ago. But the most famous version of Frankenstein was made in 1931. Now, in that year, the Hollywood studio called Universal Pictures, they thought they might try and do some scary films. And in that year, they made a film, Dracula, starring a very good Eastern European actor called Bela Lugosi. And they also made Frankenstein, starring an English actor, Boris Karloff, as the monster. Those of you who are clever will obviously know that Frankenstein is not the monster. Frankenstein is the man who creates the monster. And in that film, they changed some of the details. In that film, they made the monster was made out of bits and pieces of dead bodies. That Frankenstein went to the graveyard and robbed these corpses and used an arm here and a leg there and a head there. and stitched together this huge creature. And then his assistant, his evil little hunchbacked assistant, which everybody thinks was called Igor or Igor, but it was actually called Fritz. It's true, it was called Fritz. For some reason, we all think it was called Igor. Fritz made a classic mistake. When he was sent out to get a brain for Frankenstein, he mucked up and brought the wrong brain back, and he brought back the brain of a murderer, which Frankenstein duly put into the body of Frankenstein. And then an amazing scene in this 1931 film with all the thunder and the lightning, Frankenstein harnesses the lightning, and the bolts of lightning bring this creature to life. And the creature's not very happy about this, and proceeds to go on a rampage, killing everybody he can get his hands on.